Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm Erin Battle, the Associate Director of the W&M Washington Center. We're so excited to have you with us as we're joined by a wonderful panel of nonprofit leaders as they discuss the ways that they've been able to use this last year for good within their organizations. So as many of you know, the W&M Washington Center is celebrating 20 years this year, all throughout 2021. We're doing that through virtual events, a video series, memory collections, and many other things. So if you're interested in learning more or seeing what our past events look like, you can go to wm.edu/dc/20 years. And we'll go ahead and put that link in the chat so you can get to it pretty easily. For tonight, we're fortunate to be led by Board of Visitors member and two-time W&M alumnus, Doug Bunch. He'll moderate our wonderful panel. And we'll have some time for questions at the end as well. So please feel free to use the Q&A feature in the webinar. We'll try to get to as many as we can within the hour and a half that we've got allotted. We're also recording, so if you want to go back and watch this at any point in time, you can do that as well. So for now, I'll hand it over to Doug. And again, thank you all so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Erin, and good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Doug Bunch. I'm a 2002 graduate of W&M and a 2006 graduate of the law school. I'm a partner at a Washington, D.C. law firm called Cohen Milstein, Sellers and Toll, and am chairman of a nonprofit called Global Playground, which builds schools in developing countries and then uses those schools as platforms to engage kids across the developing world in cross-cultural dialogue with each other. I'm also a member of W&M's Board of Visitors, so help lead our institution as well. Tonight's topic is leveraging the pandemic for good to advance the mission of nonprofit organizations, a sort of positive angle of the pandemic. And we do indeed have an exciting panel of four W&M people, and I'll let them introduce themselves now. So Jane, why don't we start with you?
Hi, it's nice to be here. I'm glad to be joining you. I graduated from W&M in 1985 with a business degree, and I worked for many, many years as an event planner. I planned large conventions and trade shows. That's what I did during the day. My real passion, though, has always been advocating for children, and that actually started at W&M. A dear friend of mine from high school who also came to college with me at W&M sadly passed away from a rare form of bone cancer while we were in college. So 12 of us who were Stephen's best friends came together with his parents to start the Stephen Greenwood Childhood Cancer Foundation. And over 10 years, we helped 500 families with the non-medical expenses associated with their cancer. And over the years, I served on a number of other boards that advocate for children's issues. The SOS Children's Villages, the W&M Washington Council, actually, when it first opened, the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, and Educare DC. And about 10 years ago, I went back to school to get my master's degree at George Mason in school counseling. And they had a real focus on multiculturalism and social justice. After I graduated, one thing led to another, and I found myself on the board of the DREAM Project. And the mission of the DREAM Project is to empower dreamers to access and succeed in college. And we do that through scholarships, mentoring, and scholar and alumni support. And I'd also like to add that we have some wonderful partnerships with W&M. First, we host a W&M intern every year. Second, our mentees participate in classes with Drew Stelgis's classes. And third, our students come to W&M's campus every summer and participate in a week-long program, leadership program. So we're really grateful to W&M for the partnerships that they provide to the DREAM Project.
Thanks so much, Jane. Scott, take it away.
Everyone, my name is Scott Gemmell-Davis, and I graduated in 2017. So I've worked in the nonprofit sector for the entirety of my long 4-year career. And I'm currently at a veteran service organization, but I've actually worked in criminal justice, sector and in international development as well. Actually, one of my first experiences was nonprofits with Global Playground, the organization that Doug co-founded and chairs. So Doug's influence is honestly one of the reasons that I'm in and plan to stay in the nonprofit sector. But right now, I am the communications manager at an organization called the Armed Services Arts Partnership, or ASAP. And it's actually a nonprofit that started as a student organization at William & Mary. So ASAP, we help build communities where veterans and their families can connect and grow through comedy and the arts. And we're quickly growing. So if you are looking to work in the nonprofit sector, please keep an eye out or check out our website in the chat. And then also, if you are a military community member or you know someone who is a military community member, please check out all of our classes because they're free and open for everyone who's part of that community.
Thanks, Scott. Shelley, welcome.
Thank you, Doug. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I am a William & Mary parent. My son graduated in 2015. It seems like yesterday, but it wasn't. And happy to be a member of the William & Mary Foundation Board as well. I am the Chief Development Officer at the Kipp Foundation, and Kipp is the largest charter network of largest network of charter schools in the country. I've been a fundraiser for many years in the nonprofit space in higher ed, to include Spelman College and Syracuse University. I've worked in cultural institutions, the Smithsonian, and at a health and human service organization, Volunteers of America. And so I've been raising money in different sectors, and I find that there's commonality in best practices no matter what sector you're in, and have really enjoyed being able to carry those learnings to different organizations and evolve based on the learnings that you're gaining in each organization. So really lovely to be here and look forward to our discussion.
Thanks, Shelley. Will.
Thanks, Doug. Sorry, can you guys hear me? There we go, I'm back. My name is Will Smith. I'm a class of 2014 from William & Mary. I am the founder and executive director of LEAD, which is a global nonprofit that incubates ethical and effective leadership through two core programs. We have our academies in Liberia and Morocco, one of which, Doug's program, which you've heard a bit about now, Global Playground, helped build our first phase of our campus. And at the academies, we educate, train, and feed 205 boys and girls who are future leaders in those regions. And then we have Lead Learning, which is a second program that distributes our leadership course far and wide across the world, to date reaching over 133,000 children in Liberia, Sierra Leone, Morocco, and Bangladesh. I'm a very proud graduate of William & Mary, so I'm really excited to be here today. I'm also, got to put a plug in, I'm the brother of Chris Smith, 07, who's the founder of Virginia Beer Company. So next time you get back to Williamsburg, please go check it out. It's a great spot. But yeah, very happy to be here today with all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. So why don't we tackle the big question of the night first, and then we'll see where the conversation leads. So I'd like for each of you to talk a little bit about what it's been like to lead your organizations under pandemic, and focus particularly on how you've leveraged pandemic to advance the mission of the organization and whether those changes will be permanent. Scott, I happen to know a little bit about ASAP, so I know for a fact that this is true of you guys, so why don't you kick us off?
Sure. So I think when I read the question, the first thing I want to say is it's been hard. It's been hard to lead an organization during COVID, and I think that's true of everyone and everywhere. But you know what that looked like in practice is from the onset, it was a game of triage. I think we were just sort of making sure everyone was okay. You know, with staff, that meant figuring out new schedules and childcare. With community members or our veterans, that meant like a lot of phone calls to figure out logistics and check in on mental health. But as Doug mentioned, we realized pretty quickly that for ASAP, this was an opportunity for us, kind of across the board. So So for example, we figured out that our programs could happen online and they could happen anywhere. We realized that our donors were ready to step in and help. And so it was an opportunity for us to go from a program set that was stuck in Hampton Roads in DC, that was because it was in person, to expand to 45 states and 5 countries. So it was key for us to expand on the programmatic front. And a lot of those changes are actually somewhat permanent. For instance, now on the other side of COVID, we're planning to keep a pretty robust portfolio of virtual classes. And whenever we're going to a new city, we're going to go virtual first. Yeah, those things have stuck for us.
Thanks. Who else has thoughts? Jump right in.
One of the things that we did was to just double down on the way we were communicating. First, we really had to share what our students and teachers and communities were experiencing. And the way they pivoted in this moment was truly inspirational, whether it was, a teacher teaching an AP history class at 10 p.m. or school buses being used to deliver hotspots and, creating a fund to get Chromebooks to students. It was a moment of innovation, and on the fundraising end and community building end, we found that communications between parents and teachers were amplified. And for fundraising, we just kept talking. We just found people wanted to hear what was happening, and whether or not someone was in the, educational reform space or that, those things were cleared away. It was all about what are families and children experiencing? Tell us what's happening. And so we encouraged our regions throughout our network to keep sharing stories, to be transparent, and to going back to what Scott said, it was hard, but to celebrate the innovation, because there was a lot of innovation that came out of this moment too. And we will continue to carry that forward.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jean.
I would say that the 2 words that come to mind for me is scary and stressful. It was scary for our students and their families. Many of our students work in the sectors that were most affected by the pandemic. They worked in restaurants, childcare, house cleaning, and the gig economy. And more than 60% of our students reported that either they or their parents lost a job. And because our students and their parents are undocumented, they were not eligible for unemployment benefits. They weren't eligible for pandemic relief. And so for many, many of our families, they had 0 income coming in. And that's super scary. So scary for our parents, super stressful for the staff and the board. What we did first sounds like what Scott and Shelley also experienced. We got on the phone with every single one of our students. We called every student, and our goals were with our students. Number 1, we wanted to find out what their most immediate needs were. And number 2, we wanted to let our students know that no matter what, we're going to stick with them and we're going to help them through this really difficult time. And once we were able to establish what their most immediate needs were, and at first those needs were housing, rent payments and food insecurity, and not mental, but physical health and COVID testing, things like that. Once we figured out what their immediate needs were, we started to put the structures in place that would be able to help them. So with regard to how we used it to strengthen the organization, we found, like Shelley and Scott both found, surprisingly, that this year has actually strengthened our organization. One of our board members noted that we've gone from an organization that provides mentoring and scholarships to an organization that holistically supports our students. We hired a case manager with a grant from Act for Alexandria, our Alexandria Community Foundation, And she went about the process of setting up a lot of community partnerships with local government and other nonprofits. We set up an emergency relief fund, and we were able to help 80 of our students with almost $100,000, but we found that that wasn't enough. And so these community partnerships that we started to build, our case manager could talk one-on-one with our students and connect our students with, you know, if they were having rent problems, she'd connect them there. If they were having housing or food insecurity, she'd connect them there. So we set up a lot of really great partnerships with other nonprofits. I would say most things that we set up are probably going to continue. There are a few things. Our emergency relief fund, we're not sure if that's going to be long lasting or not. We have another loan fund that students have access to, but the emergency relief fund seems to be dropping off a little bit. But for the most part, I think we're going to keep most of the programs and structures that we put into place.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, I'll just quickly add, I think a lot of the themes will be similar here, but with LEAD, we're a kind of a unique global organization. So when the pandemic started, it didn't really change our workflow all that much. We've got kind of big teams in Liberia and Morocco, and then at the headquarter level, we're spread out. So we were well positioned from that perspective. And right off the bat, we tapped into our William & Mary network. Jill Ellis, who I think a lot of the people on the call will know, she's a big supporter of ours and advisor to the organization. So she did a quick fundraising campaign to make sure that we had, you know, some money in the bank to make sure that the schools were okay in Liberia and Morocco. And then the second program that I already described, Lead Learning, was actually born in the midst of the pandemic. So it was born out of the need to adapt, to adjust to this new world and say, how can we contribute to the global education response to this crisis? And our way of doing that was to say that we don't feel like soft skills, things like empathy, perseverance, confidence, creativity are taught in schools to the extent that they should be. And to the extent that those of us have those skills, a lot of them come from our communities or from our families. And so if we don't come from communities or families that are preaching those skills, then we maybe don't develop them. And so our idea was, let's spread that course as far and wide as possible. We built partnerships with telecommunications companies, with governments, with private education providers and NGOs in these 4 different countries that I mentioned: Liberia, Sierra Leone, Morocco, and Bangladesh. And now we're working to grow that. So it's been a really interesting moment where you sit back and say, well, what else can we do with the assets that we already have within our organization, and how can we expand our impact? And I think that's what that moment was. It was a forcing function for thinking differently about all of our organizations and in the for-profit space as well.
Thanks, Will. I'm curious how the pandemic and your leadership of your organizations during pandemic has changed you as a leader, both externally facing in the eyes of your constituents within the organization and outside of it, but also in terms of your own self-care. You know, I know from speaking with other leaders of nonprofits, other leaders of organizations, for-profit and nonprofit, that this has really sort of taxed people's bandwidth on many levels. The pandemic has also weighed much more heavily on some than on others, and exposed inequality in ways that we didn't see it before. I'm curious how, as a leader, you've changed your orientation towards that work and your orientation towards yourself in terms of self-care.
I'd be happy to kick that off as well. I think first and foremost, self-care became really, really important. And for me, I already was living a rather strange lifestyle, going from place to place. Basically, I hadn't been in one place for longer than 3 weeks in the previous 3 years. So suddenly being rooted in one place was a very different experience for me. But just being able to take time and not just wake up, open your computer, and you're at work for the next 12 hours and take time out for yourself, I found was really, really important for me to then show up and be my best when communicating with my team and the folks around our organization. As a team, I think, again, we're global in nature, and we were already using Zoom and all these different things that we all use every day now. But the actual practice changed completely. We moved away from it just being about work to actually building community as much as we could online. So we might get on a call, and we started having weekly team calls at the academy level, which we'd never had before, which was very cool, bringing people from these different contexts together. And we would spend the first 10 minutes of the call just kind of chatting about our own lives and not talking about work, and checking in on how everyone was doing in this moment. And I think that was really critical to building what it now actually feels like a real, like a family, even though we're in completely different places. So, and it also made us more productive in the time that we did spend on work. So it forces you to be a little bit more of a human than to be just like a working machine, I think.
Yeah, I think I would echo what Will shared. And on the personal, it was really humbling experience for me to feel the limits of your own bandwidth while understanding that you needed to be a catalyst to help others walk through the moment. And so being honest with things that you could take on or could not. So I'm a singer, I sing with groups in this virtual space, have still been able to sing with groups in Boston. And I kind of pulled out of music because I couldn't do, 3 hours of rehearsing on Zoom after being on Zoom all day. I'm singing again, but that was one thing I let go. And on the personal, I just started walking. So, 5, 6, 7 miles. And so I've become a walker, and that has helped center me in this space. It has helped me cope with, Doug mentioned the disparities that have been highlighted and amplified in this moment. And to know the stories of children and families that Jane, she mentioned, people losing their jobs, people losing parents. In the span of 4 weeks, we lost 6 Kippsters to gun violence in between July and August. And the youngest was 4. So when you're absorbing all of that, and then people are trying to keep going because the intensity of the work, you can see the needs, and people really did lean in. So helping people to say, put your computer in a drawer. It's not enough to say, take time for yourself, really forcing people, modeling, putting on an out of office. I'm out of office for the next hour having lunch. I'm away from my phone and my computer. So modeling the behaviors that you thought would be helpful for others to see. And those were things that I found to be helpful. And it has changed the way you build community. We have to connect using technology to make, to build our relationships. And whether it's a fun day of we just cookies and conversation, having cookies sent to people. So it's an hour of nothing but fun conversation. So we build in these days and an hour, and you're efficient. So those are things that we've taken in that I think will become baked into the way we work, no matter what the future looks like, because you've really had to pay attention and clear the clutter. So those are things that I think will, remain the same in the way that we strengthen relationship. And I think the way that our leaders are interfacing with families and community partners has also been amplified because everyone's needed each other. So when you think of where we are in communities, that partnership with the Children's Hospital, that partnership with the YWCA, we're not just educating, we're community partners. So all of our relationships have been amplified in this moment.
Thanks, Shelley. I really appreciate your comments about engaging in self-care. At the same time, you serve as a catalyst with others to walk in the moment. I think that's really significant to combine both of those two roles. Jane and Scott, any thoughts?
I have to admit that I am still a work in process on the self-care front. My husband my husband is a good enforcer, and he will come in and he'll say, okay, we're done for the day. And I'm getting better at it. You know, at 6 o'clock or whatever, I'm done, unless there's a meeting later in the evening. But for the most part, I'm done at 6 o'clock. Also, like Shelley, take time to exercise, spend time with friends, spend Zoom time with family, things like that. On the work side, I think we've all had to, in terms of self-care on the work side, we're all trying to be very mindful of each other's boundaries. And so when people, you know, when the work day's over, even if I continue to work, sometimes I don't bother other people, trying to be mindful of their boundaries. I would say also in terms of leadership style, I think we've had to become more agile, but more agile in a thoughtful and deliberative way rather than in a reactive way. In addition, we at the Dream Project, we've had to become more creative and more innovative, in that our organization, the mission of our organization is very academic focused. And we have had a problem in past years with mission creep. And so we've really tried to focus our programming on all these academic strategic missions. But what we found when the pandemic hit is our kids, if they were worrying about their housing, if they were worrying about food, if they were worrying about medical care, or their parents getting COVID, they were not going to be able to focus academically. And so how do we remain focused on our mission and avoid mission creep? But we have to help our kids take care of these other issues. And so I think I've mentioned we hired the case manager, and we created these other partnerships. And by doing that, we were able to really focus on our core mission, while at the same time taking care of the needs of our kids in all these other areas that are just foundational and essential in order for them to be able to focus academically.
For ASAP, I think it's really been the tale of two chapters. Chapter one, I really resonate with what Shelley said. We were humbled by just how quickly we found ourselves at bandwidth. And honestly, I don't think anyone on staff did a good job of self-care from, February through July or August. But I remember, as a team, there was definitely a turning point in the fall where we realized, the ship had been steadied. We were going to run out of money. A lot of community members were okay. And since then, we've had to be a lot more intentional about taking self-care ourselves and advocating for our whole team. I think two kind of funny dynamics we found are, one, Zoom is more tiring than in-person meetings. I think we all feel that way. And then the second, that at least is true for our team, is that there's just more conflict because these little communications you have when you're in an office, for instance, don't happen. And so there's just a higher prevalence of miscommunication. And so, we spent a lot of time working to resolve those conflicts. And, we get to the end of the day at 3 or 4 or 5 and we're exhausted. So it's this second chapter we're in right now is all about working outside, signing off at 4 if you can, working out in the middle of the day if you need to, getting your vaccine if you have an appointment. So that's where we are now.
Thanks, Scott. I will second your observation that Zoom is exhausting. And I say to my my partners at my firm that I would much prefer a phone call sometimes to Zoom. And they look at me like I'm some antisocial, being from outer space. And the truth is, I'm not antisocial. I just, I sometimes a phone call is a lot easier to process, especially when you're doing 5 different things. You may be finishing a run, and you're not really in a position to get on Zoom. I think that's true of a lot of us. Shelley, last week we had an hour to prepare for tonight, and you mentioned the concept of collapsing process. And I think what you meant by that is that, during pandemic, sometimes a lot happens very quickly within an organization. The status quo that once slowed things down no longer stands in the way. And I think we've seen that at William & Mary in some ways, whether we've called it on occasion, wartime powers, or, a need and necessity really of identifying what matters to us most and then running with it to accomplish what we need to accomplish while preserving what's most important at our core. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you meant by collapsing process, and if others on the panel have had similar experiences and want to chime in. I think people would be interested to hear.
Yeah, this has been disruptive when you think of organizations that have been process driven, and in the education sector, you think of planning and other sectors too. And I remember a moment, it was May, when we knew, based on information we were getting from the regions, that we had to be ready to go to market to share the broader story of the regions. Our regions were raising money to meet needs, but at the foundation, I thought we could amplify what we needed to, what the regions, the needs of the regions in a better way. And it was a moment of creating the concept, sharing it with the CEO, him sharing with the rest of the team on a Monday. That was a Friday, gave it to him on a Friday. That Monday, sharing with our, colleagues that we were going to do this fund. We were creating a fund, a $60 million fund. This is the way we were going to represent it. These were the buckets based on the information we had. So there was no process in the way. And he said, and I know that this is not the way that we do things, but we had to go to market, and we did. And the first year is $20 million, and we've raised 19 million of that 20 for that fund. And we got most of that money in 2.5 months. So I would say that it was stressful for people who are used to an iterative process to get to perfect, and there was no perfect. And so that's what that collapsing that process meant. You weren't going to get to perfect, and we had to go. And another example I can use is we were pricing a campaign. We were supposed to have a campaign. There were no dollars. There were, it was just a strategic plan. And then having to drive an organization that likes to, plan in certain ways to say, I need this information. We have to have this done by October because we have to make anchor solicitations before the end of the year. And it was, again, everyone came together in this moment. It was very stressful, but people pushed through, and because the need was real. And, you have to balance the sense of urgency and whether that's you're weighing into a supremacist culture, and that were all these things, but we knew we had to get things out the door. So there were moments when we just said, we understand and respect process, but we're creating a different process. We're creating something that is at a different pace, acknowledging the value of broader process, but really emphasizing the need to get out quickly.
Yeah, if I can add to that, Doug. It's funny, we sort of went through the opposite process because we were in more of a startup phase still, right? So LEAD is comprised of these 2 academies and then the LEAD learning course. And the first academy is actually what started everything. It was founded in 2015. LEAD was founded in mid 2018. And so when the pandemic hit, it was really only a little over 1.5 years old. And so we were still sort of in that startup phase where we were just go, go, go without a lot of process. And what the pandemic did is once we got those moments to, we got through the very early stage where you're quite frightened and you're thinking, how do I ensure the organization is financially sustained? And we had a moment to breathe. in addition to establishing lead learning, we said, all right, we're actually going to build a lot more process into our organization. Like, we're going to actually have a long-term strategic plan. We're going to actually have an organized, centralized database of files. We're going to actually have a CRM, all these things that we didn't have because we were go pre-pandemic. So just like an interesting opposite perspective from a much younger, like early stage group, right? Having to create that process, but finding the time to do it because of the pandemic, which is sort of, you wouldn't have expected it.
Thanks, Will. You know, I think it's really interesting to hear how nonprofits have changed over time, and in particular how things that maybe we took for granted before matter more now. And at William & Mary, we've talked a lot recently about why place matters. A university clearly is, you know, it accomplishes its work because students are on campus and because they can interact with professors and because there's a close community. We know from having experienced it at William & Mary ourselves that really makes the William & Mary experience the reason why people come to Williamsburg. I'm curious, you know, given that most of our nonprofits involve schools, or in Scott's case, a stage as place, how the meaning of place has changed, and whether when the pandemic begins to subside and people begin to return to normal or something new that approximates normal, how do you think that the meaning of place will be renewed or change vis-a-vis what it was before?
I think that the meaning of place will be elasticized, because when I think of people being able to go into schools and tour and see students, and they didn't have the chance to do that. And then virtual tours were created. And so that actually gives you an opportunity to bring more people in. So yes, will people have a chance to, we hope, interact with students and, you know, feel like they are a part of that experience by being in person. But I think that we have found ways to connect with people, to let them feel that sense of place using technology. And we've had to be better at it. So we've become expert at creating that experience out of necessity. And so that's not going to go away. So I think we're going to have both, and that will make it better. It takes the pressure off of thinking you need to be in a place to create that sense of belonging. And I think that word belonging is more powerful than inclusion. So we want to create that sense of belonging. And so I think of a hybrid and that sense of place that's being amplified in this moment.
Scott.
Similarly,
Oh, go ahead, Jane. I was going to put Scott on the spot, but Jane, you go first.
Similarly to Shelley, our students and our mentors get a whole lot out of being in the same place. Being undocumented is a unique situation. And when our students are able to gather, they gather with other undocumented kids who often live in the shadows. They don't like to share with other people that they're undocumented or what their status is. And so when they have the opportunity to be together all in one group, and it's a very trusting environment in person, that's a really powerful thing for our students. And so that was something that was really hard in a couple of instances. So for example, we have mentoring for high school students all throughout the year, and our mentoring team really had to get creative to help the mentees feel that sense of community with each other, but also to feel the sense of community, or to feel that trusting bond with their mentor over Zoom. And that's kind of hard. But on the other hand, as Shelley was saying, our mentoring program is based in Northern Virginia. And so it used to be that only kids who could get there could participate. Well, now we have mentees from all over the state of Virginia. And so that's been really wonderful. So at this point in our mentoring program, I think for next year, we're planning on, as Shelley said, kind of a hybrid model where we are going to try and gather in person because there's so much value in that for our students. But in addition, we're going to provide a virtual option for students who live too far away to come to mentoring. The other thing that we found, we do a summer summit every year for our scholars, for our college students. And we do a summer summit to give them skills for college success and career success. And in the past, many of them, first of all, they work to help their families pay bills. And so often it was hard for them to put aside 2 days for the summer summit. But because it was virtual, we had a really great attendance this year. And so we're going to have to structure it this year in a way that allows for as many students as possible to attend. But again, that being together in the same space is really powerful for them. So we'll have to incorporate both.
Thanks, Jane.
I'll jump in here. Doug, it's a really, really important question. And I think it's one that we're trying to answer at ASAP right now. For context, and Doug alluded to this stage, but the kind of secret sauce of ASAP's classes and programs is that whenever any veteran takes our 7-week stand-up comedy class or storytelling class, it actually culminates with a performance under the spotlight on a stage. And for our comics, that's at these iconic venues like DC Improv or Caroline's in New York City. And so it's a life-changing moment for so many of our veterans when they graduate to get up on stage and be vulnerable and put themselves out there in front of the audience. And we lost that with the pandemic, right? We've done plenty of performances over Zoom, but frankly, it's not the same thing to try to do stand-up comedy to your computer screen. And so I think we're wrestling right now with, what aspects of ASAP's place need to be restored in person, like those performances, and what aspects can continue in a hybrid or virtual atmosphere. And I think I really resonate with what both Shelley and Jane said there, which is, it's going to be a hybrid model moving forward. I think we have found that we can create these safe communities in a virtual space where people can connect over common experiences and be vulnerable, but it will never replace, doing a stand-up set on stage. So.
Thanks, Scott. I have a few more questions, but I want to invite any participant to put a question in the Q&A, and we'll pose it to our panelists. I think that, because many of our attendees tonight may be current students or recent alumni, I wonder if you could speak to advice you have for people who want to enter the nonprofit sector after they graduate, enter the post-pandemic nonprofit sector. What advice would you have for them?
To do it. It's an incredible experience. As the youngest person here, I haven't regretted a day of it, and it does make waking up in the morning easy. I think I'd also add that be ready to work really hard and to face a lot of barriers. It's not an easy industry. If you want to be in fundraising, and I bet Shelley will resonate with this, but it's really hard. You're always racing the clock. Convincing people to give money is not an easy thing to do. And if you want to be on the programmatic side, you have to constantly prove your impact with rigor and data, and that takes a lot of effort. The only other thing I want to add to that question is actually something that Doug told me probably 5 years ago, that I do think every young person needs to keep in mind, but it's especially important for the nonprofit sector, which is answer emails within 24 hours. Work on communicating and answer emails within 24 hours. That would be my advice to a young person. Thanks, Doug.
I forgot I told you that. I have to check myself and make sure that I'm still doing that. Will, last week you mentioned the expanded potential of internships in pandemic. I wonder if you could just comment on that for a minute.
Yeah, it's super interesting because we've always had deep ties to William & Mary as an organization. So pre-pandemic, we would have students from William & Mary come, typically 1, 2, or 3, to both Morocco and Liberia, and actually conduct research on the academy's impact on our students' leadership potential, which is a very cool experience for them and fantastic for us. Obviously, that stopped in the midst of the pandemic. What it did do, though, was it opened up, in the same way that we've just talked about, kind of the expansion of access to everyone's organizations in this panel. It expanded access for anyone who wanted to come in and be a part of LEAD and be a part of our organization from an internship perspective. So we actually had a William & Mary student, Mallory, who's been fantastic for about 12 months, starting from February 2020. Interning for LEAD and doing a whole variety of tasks, much more than she initially signed up for. But really enjoying her experience, I think, and learning a lot about what it looks like to be on the inside of a nonprofit that's battling through a crisis and working to grow at the same time. So I think it's created a really unique opportunity, especially for current students, to dip their toes in spaces that maybe otherwise they wouldn't have had access to. Maybe there would have been resource constraints because they couldn't get to wherever they needed to get for the internship, a whole host of potential reasons why they couldn't have accessed different internship opportunities prior. Those barriers are gone right now. So, it's the perfect opportunity if you've been thinking about, maybe I want to dip my toes in the nonprofit sector. I don't know if I want to do something that's more within education or healthcare. Well, there's no reason why you can't apply to those opportunities now if they're virtual. So I think that's one of the really beautiful things that the pandemic has brought, is it's enabled access in a way that we haven't had prior, at least for those who have access to technology to and that's a whole nother can of worms. But I think that's something that we've really benefited from, and I think students themselves can benefit as well.
Jane, Shelley.
Oh, sorry, I would just add that, echo what Scott said, and well, just do it. And I think understand, as you go through and you're doing these internships, always ask yourself, what spaces, where am I comfortable? How is this adding, what is my brand? As I'm learning and evolving and having these experiences, where is this taking me, and how is this defining me as I'm thinking of myself as, in the nonprofit space, or, envisioning myself in another space, and understand how you like to function, the environments in which you like to function, is where there's the ambiguity, or do you need something more structured? Because then, you're going to be matching yourself to places where you're going to fit. So it's not just, having the internship, but or placing yourself in the nonprofit space. As you have these opportunities, there are amazing opportunities that you can't envision. I know someone who was, I worked with them at Oxfam, and now they've become an organizational development person based on the work that we did with someone who came in. But she's working for a place, that was working to eliminate poverty. So there are so many roads that you're unaware of. And I'd say just understand the value of your brand, that you're always evolving it, and keep coming back to what you're gaining and learning through these experiences, and how that relates to you and how you're developing your brand.
Thanks, Shelley. We all, myself included, have been in the position of hiring new employees and supervising new employees. I'm curious what your thoughts are on what skill sets employees will thrive with. What particular qualities or characteristics are you looking for when you hire, and then employees who are starting out work in your organizations? How can they best succeed? Scott, you're nodding your head. Yeah.
Shelley, do you want it?
Sure. I'll just add that I'm looking for people who understand the value of leading from where they sit, and that you can be a leader no matter where you're placed in an organization, and that you believe in that ethos, and you have to be able to communicate, you have to be well-rounded, you have to be able to pivot. So I'm looking for people who are, now of course in my fundraising space, I want that experience, but I also am looking for people who understand the value of learning. There's a quote that I love from Mary Catherine Bateson. She's deceased, but cultural anthropologist, who said, "You are not what you know, but what you will learn." That's what I'm looking for. That's what people need to keep evolving and learning. So those are the skill sets that I think are important.
Good advice.
I love and agree with all of those. I think there are three things that come to mind as far as soft skills I'd encourage kind of young people to work on, at least that would fit with ASAP's culture. One is communicate a lot, like over communicate, whether that's text, Slack, email, in person. Just communication is everything, especially in a Zoom world. Second thing is proactivity. I think especially in this Zoom world, managers have a hard time constantly finding things to give. So people who will come in, identify problems in an organization and go solve them, who will come up with their own recommendations and solutions and take charge. We love that. And then the third one is exactly as Shelley said, just learners. We want people who constantly ask questions, who want to keep learning, want to be the best in their field, and recognize that, no one knows everything. People who say, I don't know a lot, we like that.
Yeah, I frequently encourage those who I supervise to not just bring problems to me, but bring solutions. I was going to say when you come to my office, but there's no office these days. But when you send me an email or call or ask for a Zoom call, if we're going to talk about a problem, think about 3 different ways we can solve it. That I think is key, and I think that gets at the concept of being proactive that you're talking about, Scott. Too, I think we hear a lot in DC about the value of networking to get your foot in the door and to get that first opportunity. How valuable, in your experience, in your nonprofit or in the nonprofit world generally, is networking and building relationships?
And just to add on the last question, yeah, the importance of learning and critical thinking and being willing to try things. That's like the first piece for us. Is you're curious, you're willing to learn, and you're willing to try things, even if you've never touched them before. I think that's a really, really good approach to have when getting started in this space. So, sorry, Doug, can you repeat the question really quickly? I just lost my train of thought.
Sure. The value of networking and relationship building in the nonprofit world generally and in your organization.
Absolutely critical. I could probably trace 90 to 95% of LEAD's funding back to the William & Mary Network. And that's purely because of, it's not really a plug for the school even, it's because of a few really key individuals who are William & Mary alumni, who opened up their networks, most of which were William & Mary networks, and just allowed me to kind of navigate that space and start to build relationships. If you get into running your own nonprofit, or you get into a role like Shelley has, which is Chief Development Officer, like you're going to be doing a whole lot of relationship building. I don't think of fundraising as fundraising. I think of it as friend raising. And so that's essentially what networking is. So I think it's a really critical skill to have if you're going to be in an externally facing position within an organization. If that doesn't feel right to you, that's totally fine too. You can go and focus more on the internal side of the organization as you build that skill. But I think if you're naturally a more kind of social person and you enjoy conversation, you enjoy being out in the world, then I think like your networking skills are critical in this space.
adding to what Will was just saying, I always tell our board members and other people who go out and help us raise funds that you need to throw your net out really wide. And I often find that a lot of times as I'm networking, the individuals and the people that I think are going to be super helpful, for whatever reason, they're not as helpful, or they're doing other things. But I find if I throw my net out wide, that I get a lot back from places that I never expected to get help or funding or support from others. So throw your net out wide, very wide.
Good advice. We're about to end. We have a few minutes left. I'm going to pose one more question, and then we're lucky enough to have Roxanne Adler-Hickey, the director of the Washington Center, with us, who will join us and speak for a couple minutes. One, to your point, Jane, one thing that I often tell Women Marry students and recent alumni is to not be afraid to approach others in our network and cast, as you say, cast the net widely and reach out to speak to them. The worst somebody can do is say no. That's all. But chances are, they'll be willing to talk to you. People like to talk about themselves, actually. And I think that, often people are surprised by how open people in our networks are to communication and to connecting. The other thing I often tell Women Marry students and recent alumni is to not feel like you need to identify on day one as a freshman or even on day one as a senior, what you want to do for the rest of your life. To be open to sort of the twists and turns and things developing in ways that you didn't expect. If someone had told me that I would be a partner at a law firm in DC litigating securities fraud class actions, having founded a nonprofit to build schools around the world and on Women Marry's board, I would have said they were crazy back when I was a freshman and sophomore. And I think, part of being a student at Women Marry is being open to opportunities as they present themselves. And so I want to end by asking you all, for students who are still on campus or virtually on campus, as it may be, what's your advice to them? What should they take advantage of, either that you took advantage of or that you think back and wish you had taken advantage of? What's helped shape you, and what would you recommend that they engage with?
That's a great question.
Maybe Shelley, maybe you can say this. You can answer this as a parent.
I agree with what you said. You don't have to know everything that you're going to do. And when I think of my own son's journey as an economics major, who's now become a technologist and, software developer, I would never have imagined that. So I think pursue your passions and also listen, because people may see things in yourself that you may not see. And so that's just something to always be open to. You're not driven by it, but there may be people who see things in you that you don't see in yourself. And so you always want to be open there. And Doug, I just echo that you can't define that journey. It's not linear. It's not linear. And the way that you look at yourself in any moment, that's where you're supposed to be to get you to the next moment, and to celebrate, each step in the journey.
Well said.
I would echo what Shelley is saying. If you are lucky to be able to do so, follow your passion, do what you love. I started, as I mentioned, as a business major, and I planned big conventions and trade shows. But what I learned is that my passion was advocating for children's issues. And it's never too late to change, and don't be afraid to change mid-course either. I was 40 something years old when I decided to go to grad school. and get my master's degree in school counseling, which is vastly different than a business degree or managing conventions and trade shows. But it's something that has been very fulfilling to me. I like meeting and convention planning as well, but I've really found my place. And so don't be afraid to turn. If you're on a path, don't be afraid to turn and veer off onto another path.
Yeah, I would just quickly note, going back to the concept of curiosity, like you are in a space right now in Williamsburg on campus, hopefully soon, if you're not there yet, where you just have a world of opportunities. Like there's so many different things that you can explore. I had no idea I wanted to do what I'm doing now when I finished my sophomore year, for example. I thought I was going to go work on Capitol Hill because I was a government major. And then I stepped in a class called Politics in Africa, which I kind of had no business taking, but I thought, oh, that looks interesting. Let me jump in. And it completely reversed the trajectory of my life, right? Taught by Phil Ressler, who remains a really close friend today. So I think that's just one example of, if you maintain kind of an openness and you're curious and you're still not sure what you want to do, trying different kind of things at William & Mary, because you have the best of the best across all of these different departments and sectors, you will more than likely discover something that's exciting to you, or discover a number of interests that you can later pursue, like Doug has. So I think curiosity is really critical.
I would urge students have like persistence and lean on the William & Mary network. Persistence meaning if you want to participate in a movement or a cause or work for a nonprofit, just keep nudging people. I imagine Shelley has experienced a lot of this in fundraising, but persistence pays off. And then the second thing I'd say, lean on the William & Mary community. I would say, if I reach out to someone who's a William & Mary alumni on LinkedIn, there's a 90% chance they'll respond. And there is something special about this William & Mary alumni community and willingness to have a conversation or help out in any way.
Thanks, Scott. So if Roxanne can hear me, I'd love to invite her to say a few words. Roxanne, thanks so much for allowing us to do this tonight. We really appreciate the opportunity. And the floor is yours.
Oh, no, I thank you all. I mean, this has really just been fantastic. And I was trying to capture what I thought was the best advice. And then as you kept going, I thought, no, that is. And you've all said so many really important, wonderful things that are valuable for the current students, but also for young alumni, more experienced alumni, for staff. And I think it comes down to what a lot of you have pointed out, and that is the value of the William & Mary community. And the Washington Center is just one place of belonging for William & Mary, but because we're in DC, we're really lucky to have 20,000 alumni in this area. And you represent a really important part of our alumni, in that you are here as the leaders of nonprofits. But this is where the magic happens, when our students and our alumni come together and offer these opportunities and this advice for our students. And you're absolutely right. This is how we're successful. This is how we grow and build and support one another. And just by being here tonight, you've offered so much to this community. And so Shelley, Scott, Jane, Will, Doug, absolutely you too. Thank you for coming together and for sharing your wisdom and your advice. I know you've all had already long Zoom days, but to do this, and Doug to step in both as a nonprofit leader, as our Board of Visitors member, and as our moderator tonight, you've really done a huge service to William & Mary, and on behalf of the university and the Washington Center, I thank you all. And for those of you who are tuned in tonight or watching afterwards, thank you for being a part of this conversation, for listening. And in the spirit of sharing and continuing to support one another, we're going to put some links in the chat for each of these organizations that our alumni represent. So if you want to learn more, if you want to raise your hand and volunteer, if you want to support, if you want to give a gift, that there's ways to do that for each of these amazing organizations, as well as for the Washington Center. We are always looking to support students who want to study in DC, who get to come in person and meet alumni like you. And so we do have a scholarship fund for those students as well. We are also, and I'll say one last sort of plug in the spirit of tonight, still looking for summer internships for William & Mary students. So if you've been inspired by tonight and you want to give that opportunity to a William & Mary student, please let us know. Erin Battle, who opened this evening, we're going to put her email in the chat for you as well, and you can reach directly out to her, and that can be in person or virtual. But that is how we continue to grow and stand on one another's shoulders as we advance our community. So thank you all again for being here. We are extremely grateful, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening and can go put your feet up and put some pajama pants on if they're not on already. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.